Okay, welcome to some review and some elaboration. I hit the button and it didn't work. Part three. So this is the last part of some review and some elaboration. Again, this was originally supposed to be one short video, but it is not that anymore. And I also don't know about you if you've been watching these things one right after the other, but I'm recording them one after the other and editing them one after the other, and I am now tired. So I might be a little off at this point because I've been doing this for a while, but I'm probably fine. I'm sure it's already going well with the button clicking and whatnot. A couple quick points to review. So norms, again, written and unwritten rules that specify behaviors appropriate and inappropriate to particular social situations. And norms allow social life anyway, to be predictable and ordered. Sanctions are expressions of approval or disapproval given to people for upholding or violating social norms, and they maintain and reinforce social norms. We have negative sanctions, which we've talked quite a bit about, and we have positive sanctions. What I want to go with now is these questions of where do these sanctions come from and who imposes these sanctions. So I know I've touched on this a bit, but I want to get a bit more explicit with it. So, if we have these social norms and we have these different kinds of social norms like folkways, mores, taboos, and laws, well, how do we make sure people follow them? Well, we have social control, right? So we've talked about sanctions up to this point. Well, anytime, any reaction to any form of deviance or any sort of positive sanction where we are encouraging community conformity, rather, or rewarding conformity, would fit under this broad category of social control. It's kind of a dark sounding phrase, social control. It sounds kind of scary in some ways, like it's like we live in some weird fascist police state, which we don't, at least as of the time of this recording. I don't know what things are like whenever you're watching it, but at least as I'm recording it, we are not quite there. But I mean, really all we're talking about is just the enforcement of norms and social regulation. And within that context, again, another kind of scary sounding phrase is agents of social control. And so agents of social control are just the people or the groups that are enforcing the social rules. And we have different kinds of agents of social control. We have formal agents of formal social control, and we have informal social control, right? So we have people who enforce norms in a formal way and informal ways. What does that mean? Well, we'll break it down. So formal social control are official actions from social institutions with the power to sanction individuals. Quick side note, I wrote that definition myself, pretty proud of it. And the other ones, all the definitions from informal and formal, I didn't pull those from anywhere, wrote them myself. I think they're pretty good. So hooray for me. Agents of social control, social institutions and individuals who have been granted the official power to sanction individuals. I'm realizing now that maybe this definition isn't so great. So social institutions and individuals who have been granted the official power to sanction individuals from society. I'm realizing that phrasing is confusing now. So here, I'm not saying that it's the power to sanction individuals who live in societies. That's silly. It's society has granted formal agents of social control with their power. So the power to regulate others' behavior officially doesn't come from the individual, but it comes from individuals occupying positions that grant them power, okay? So if I am an agent of social control and my power is formal, it's not because I was born with that power. It's because I occupy some kind of social position that gives me the power to enforce social norms. So I'll give you some examples. So some examples of formal social control and their agents. This is not a complete list by any stretch of the imagination, but want to try and cover a wide range. The group that probably pops into people's minds most readily, I would guess, or one of the ones that pops into people's minds most readily, would be the police. The police are fairly visible. They are in the news a lot, especially now, but they have a great deal of power. So the police have the power to do things like write speeding tickets, or give parking tickets, or arrest us, right? The police have the formal power to use violence to impose social order. All right, very few groups have that power, but the police do. So yeah, I mean, when you get a ticket or when you're arrested, that's a formal process. That's like an official process that takes place within an institution, a bureaucratic system. It's documented. There are rules governing it, and the implications are pretty profound for your life. So yeah, that's a social position that grants official power. We also see formal social control within courts. That's another one that's going to pop into people's minds probably pretty readily. Within the court system, you can be legally required to pay a fine, so you can lose money. You can go for the court and have your rights or freedoms stripped away in one form or another. You might be required to perform some kind of community service. We saw in a previous video how people can actually be sentenced to face things like social degradation and humiliation, and you can end up in prison. You can actually also, I didn't add this, I should have, you can also be sentenced to be executed depending on what you've done and where you are. So the court system has a lot of social control, a lot of power to impose sanctions on people. Schools function as agents of social control. And here I want to point out that agents of social control don't always just impose negative sanctions. They can also impose positive sanctions. So it's both discouraging deviance and violations of norms, but also encouraging and rewarding conformity. So for instance, report cards, right? So this can be either a positive or negative sanction depending on the situation, or it can be a mix, right? So high grades reward conformity and reward following social rules, whereas low grades punish not doing what society says you're supposed to do, or not doing what the school says you're supposed to do. This is kind of a silly picture, but I really like it. So this is like an old timey image of something that people don't do anymore. I don't think, I hope not. It'd be, I don't know, maybe people do somewhere, but I searched for detention, and this is one of the images that popped up. So you can be punished by being forced to stay after school, for instance, or by being required to do extra work. And there's this kind of old image of, or old idea of having someone stand at the front of the room and write on the blackboard, I will not talk in class, or I will not make noise in class, or whatever. I don't know if people ever did that for real, but maybe they did, I'm not sure. But being forced to stay after is a genuine punishment. Being expelled is another one, right? So detention, expulsion, certainly negative sanctions. Being granted a diploma is a positive sanction. Now we think of that as just being a normal thing that people experience. Well, depending on your background, I mean, you might, it might not be as assumed as in other places, but we don't see high school diplomas necessarily as particularly, as being rewarded for something, but you only get a high school diploma if you follow social rules and you follow social dictates, and you do it in a particular way, and you do it in a satisfactory way. So other people get to decide if you get a diploma or not. You don't get to decide that. Your teachers who are giving you your grades, school administration, and so on, decide whether or not you get a diploma. So if you displease the schools that you've been enrolled in, you won't get the diploma. And not everyone gets the diploma. So it is very much a reward. It encourages and encourages conformity and reinforces social norms. And also just being allowed to participate in graduation, right? So it's not just the diploma itself, but being publicly recognized, having people cheer for you. Those are definitely positive sanctions, and you're only allowed access to that kind of participation through formal organizations, schools as formal organizations. Doctors, oftentimes we don't think of as necessarily being formal agents of social control, but they are. Doctors get to decide what counts as an illness. Doctors get to decide whether or not you get access to certain medical treatments. And there are situations where doctors can act in ways very similar to police and to the court system, but with less oversight. Doctors can involuntarily commit people for psychiatric reasons. This is something that not a lot of people, I think people are generally like aware of to an extent, but they don't know much. In fact, it was really difficult for me to find an image to use here. And this is not a good image, it's just somebody like laying in a hospital. But yeah, it's not something we talk about very much. And so I couldn't find anything that was really like appropriate here. But under certain circumstances, a doctor, actually not even just under certain circumstances, a doctor under any circumstances can decide that you are a danger to yourself or others, and the laws vary by state, and can have you committed to a psychiatric institution against your will. And there's nothing you can do about it. No one intervenes. Like you can't call the police to prevent the orderlies at the hospital from taking you to the psych facility, because the police aren't going to stop that from happening because the doctor's allowed to do that. So you can literally have your rights and freedoms stripped away from you because a doctor signs a form. So this is a quick side note. I have a shameless plug for you. I am a producer at, well, I'm making this sound all like more sort of official than it is, but a friend and I, or a couple friends and I, produce podcasts, and one of our podcasts is called Committable, and it's in the process of being released now, at least at the time of this recording, and it covers, or it starts with the story of my friend who was involuntarily committed about 20 years ago, and we get into the laws and the process and the effects of being involuntarily committed. So like for my friend, a lot of people have positive experiences, it helps them a lot. My friend was severely traumatized. And so, there are consequences of being involuntarily committed, and we talk about it in the show. If you're interested, you could just, on whatever your favorite podcast app is, just search for Committable, or you can go to our website, sensiblenonsense.squarespace.com. So shameless plug for that. Yeah, we're 3 episodes deep into the first season as of this moment. We got 5 more coming. Hopefully there'll be a second season. You should check it out if you want. It's not a requirement, but it's pretty good, I think, my biased opinion. But regardless, doctors are or can act as agents of social control with this formal power, right? That's given to them or invested in them because of their position. And then there's this podcast about it. It's crazy. So it's a coincidence here. We were just talking about doctors, and there's a podcast about that. Oh, that's a coincidence right there. All right. So now, informal social control. And my definitions here, again, I wrote them. I'm slightly less proud of them since I ran into the mistake I made in the previous one. But informal social control would be these kind of unofficial sanctions from institutions or individuals. What does that mean? Well, I'll give you some examples. And agents of social control that are enforcing these rules. When social control, informal social control is being used or it's imposed, the agents themselves are also informal. It's not as if the people who are imposing informal social control have some kind of official power granted to them. It's just within the context of daily life or in certain spaces. So when we think about informal agents of social control, they're individuals, institutions who are in the position to impose these unofficial sanctions, but they're still real sanctions though. So some examples, communities as a whole. So the community that you live in, especially if it's a smaller, tight-knit community, but regardless, any community can, through these unofficial means, impose sanctions of behavior. It can encourage behavior, discourage behavior, whatever it is. So where do we see that? Well, just when you move around in the community, if people give you annoyed or disgusted or disappointed looks, right? that's a representative of the community. It could be a stranger, very likely. We get these things from strangers all the time. That's if somebody gives you a disappointed or disgusted look or is angry at you and directs that anger at you, that person is an agent of social control. They're doing that because they see you as having violated some rule, and that you're not supposed to do that. And so they're reacting. And that's supposed to send a signal to not do that thing anymore. So yeah, I mean, that's an act of imposing social control. If we have anger directed at us, at the movie theater, I did add this one because don't talk at the movie theater. Don't be on your phone. God, that's it's so annoying. Unless, I don't know, in some contexts it's fine and everybody's like, sometimes it's like a thing where people don't care. But watch the movie. Go outside if you want to talk on your phone. But yeah, people can be angry. But also we can have positive sanctions too, where we smile at each other, or we say good job, or attaboy, or whatever it is. And yeah, so we're rewarding. It can be strangers, right? We can think about friends and family. So friends and family are different categories of agents of social control, but they operate in similar ways. So I lump them together. Also, this picture is adorable. I challenge you to find a more adorable picture than this. And you know what? I don't even need to see what you're going to come up with, because you're going to lose. Because this picture is epically adorable. It is the very definition. It's the embodiment of adorable. And I think this is probably the last picture I'm ever going to look at in my life, because why would I? Because I've seen the heights of adorableness. Why continue? At least that's my opinion. Actually, I lied about this being the last picture I see, because I'm going to put other pictures up on screen right now. So in terms of sanctions, we have emotional support, right? So we can get emotional support from friends and family. That's a positive sanction. Gift giving, right? We give each other gifts in certain situations, and that certainly are rewards in one way or another. We can also have people be angry at us for things that we do. So if we are a bad child or a bad parent or a bad friend, people can get angry at us. And we can also have people cut themselves off from us. So we can lose family relationships, we can lose relationships with friends, and those are very much forms of punishment, right? If you have a friend who says, who gets so angry at you or so upset by something you did, and says, I never want to see you again, that is very likely anyway to at least make you think about your behavior and change it potentially. Same thing with like losing a romantic relationship like that, depending on why. If it's in response to like infidelity, if you're monogamous and not polyamorous, or angering the other person in some way, them leaving you is a sanction, or you leaving them, right? These are also like things that not just other people do to you, but you do these things as well, potentially. Church. So church communities, and the church community is going to operate in similar ways as either the broader community as a whole or friends and family. So emotional support, gift giving. You can have people be angry, you can be excommunicated, or you can just have people kind of shun you or not want to deal with you. And so again, similar sorts of sanctions when we think about informal social control. I do want to give a quick clarification. There are times when the groups that I have listed as formal agents of social control will impose sanctions that are not formal, right? So just because someone is a police officer or a judge or a doctor or whatever, a school or whatever, not every sanction that they impose is a formal sanction. So they can use informal sanctions too. So for instance, doctors, right? Doctors can involuntarily commit someone against their will. That's an exercise of formal power. But doctors can also do things like recommending that you change your diet. Like, I suggest you eat less salt. That is a recommendation from a doctor. It's not, that's informal. They're making a recommendation to you. But there's no official power behind it. They can't force you to do it. we have certain people who are invested with certain powers. Doctors can involuntarily commit people. Teachers can fail people or give them good grades. But formal agents of social control can only impose sanctions that their position allows them to. So a doctor, for instance, can't keep you from getting a diploma. I think it's not a power that they have. Or they can't keep you from getting into college. But they can help you get into college by helping you write, by writing a recommendation or something if they know you. So that would be an act of informal sanctioning, right? Positive sanctioning. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to clarify that because it's easy to think, all right, anything doctors do, or anything the police do, or anything a judge does or a teacher does is formal, but that's not the case. They can act informally as well. Agents of social control are everywhere. And you are also an agent of social control. If you have ever gotten angry at somebody, or ever asked somebody to stop doing something, or in any way expressed displeasure, or directed any sort of negative emotion at anyone ever, stranger, friend, family member, coworker, teacher, whatever, you are an agent of social control. So you're also an agent of social control for yourself. And actually, I need to stop for a second. This is a big one. So all those sanctions that I talked about, the informal ones, you impose those too. And you might also be in a position to impose formal sanctions. So if you are, you work at a company and you are the supervisor for people who are under, who work for you, you can offer them encouragement and say, hey, good job. Those would be informal sanctions. But you can also potentially write people up and get them in trouble or get them fired, or you can fire them or whatever. So you might be a formal agent of social control, but regardless, you're definitely an informal agent of social control because, if you get mad at anybody, you give people dirty looks, whatever, even without realizing it, right? You don't have to realize that you're doing it, but you are engaged in the process of trying to regulate and control the behavior of other people. Okay, that's what it is. Whenever you give somebody a dirty look, think about why you're giving it to them, because they've done something that they're not supposed to do, and the rule that they broke isn't a rule that you made up. It's a social rule, right? It came from somewhere. This is a big one, okay? The biggest, most important agent of social control for all of us is ourselves. So the most important agent of social control, or the most influential agent of social control on me is me. Because I regulate my behavior and I impose the rules on myself by virtue of living in the world. So when I go to teach a class and we're face to face, I walk in, no one has to tell me what to do. I know what to do. And I know I could do different things. Like I know instead of walking up to the front of the room and start talking and writing on a chalkboard, I know I go to the back of the room, curl up into a ball and cry, or I could stand on a desk and start singing, or I could start throwing pencils everywhere. Like I could do all kinds of those things, but I don't. I impose the norms on myself, and we do that all the time. You do it too. So these outside agents are only relevant, are only impactful when we fail in our own regulation of ourselves. But most of the time we don't. I mean, even the most deviant people on the planet overwhelmingly are following the rules. And whenever you follow the rules, you're imposing those rules on yourself, right? You've learned what the rules are and you're doing what you're supposed to do. We don't think of it that way. We often think of ourselves as just acting freely. But if you go back to our conversation with Durkheim, I made the case there that we're not, right? So the free will lecture. So yeah, you are an agent of social control for yourself. And so if you want to know who's controlling your behavior, look in a mirror and you'll see your face in it, because you'll be looking at yourself, and that's how mirrors work. Okay, I'm realizing this joke was more clever when I was writing the slide than it is now. Feels a bit awkward, but it's like a mirror, and you're looking at yourself, and you're seeing Yeah, okay, not a great joke, but I tried. I really thought that was going to be better, but now I can't even see anybody's faces as watching this, but I'm guessing, I don't know. Yeah. But regardless, when we regulate our own behavior, that's because we've internalized the social norms and then we follow them. Usually we follow them pretty mindlessly. We do it without thinking about it, but there are times when we have to force ourselves. So, like if you don't feel like going to work, you will probably force yourself, right? Or you'll face consequences. But most of the time when you are making decisions about how you're going to act at work or at school or at, with family or whatever, you are following the rules for that environment. And it's only when your own internal regulation fails that these external agents of social control will come down on you and react. Agents of social control can be extremely powerful. So, for instance, the police are extremely powerful and have a lot of power to regulate and control what we do. Same with doctors. Like I, as an instructor, have a good amount of power. And, we are vulnerable to that, right? We are often in a position where, outside influences can have enormous impacts on us in formal ways. There is a particular experiment that I want to share. There's a good chance you've actually already seen this. I'm going to show a video in a second. It's not long, it's like 10 minutes, discussing the Milgram experiment, an experiment run by Stanley Milgram. It'll be the last thing that is part of the lecture. But I think it illustrates the power of authority of agents of social control really well. And I'll just put it on. I don't own the rights to this video, just like, virtually everything else. And some of the pictures are mine in some of the lectures, but I pretty much just assume I am not a copyright holder on anything that I show. But it's really informative and it's about 10 minutes long, so I'm just gonna let it run. And then I'll probably say like one or two quick things at the end, but then we'll be done. So it's fascinating, so check it out. First, I'm gonna disappear.
In a unique period from the early 60s to the early 70s, a group of social scientists conducted a series of experiments examining the nature of human behavior and its relationship to social conventions and situations.
In this setting, I allow things to be done to me that I wouldn't allow in any other context. The dentist is about to put an electric drill into my mouth. In this setting, I willingly expose my throat to a man with a razor blade.
Stanley Milgram, one of the most influential social psychologists of the time, was particularly fascinated with the dangers of group behavior and blind obedience to authority.
What is there in human nature that allows an individual to act without any restraints whatsoever, so that he can act inhumanely, harshly, severely, and in no way limited by feelings of compassion or conscience? These are questions for me.
But he might be dead in there.
The experiment requires that you continue teaching.
330 volts.
The experiments that Milgram and others conducted were controversial, and for ethical reasons may never be conducted again. Yet the results of those experiments remain groundbreaking, profoundly revealing about the tensions between the individual and society, and increasingly relevant to contemporary life. In 1962, Stanley Milgram shocked the world with his study on obedience. To test his theories, he invented an that would become a window into human cruelty. In ascending order, a row of buttons marked the amount of voltage one person would inflict upon another. Milgram's original motive for the experiment was to understand the unthinkable, how the German people could permit the extermination of the Jews.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience? These are exactly the questions that I wanted to investigate at Yale University.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Learn. All right, now the next thing we'll have to do is set the learner up so that he can get some sort of punishment.
What inspired Milgram, I would say there were a number of factors. One of them is he was very ambitious. He wanted to make a mark in social psychology. And he wanted, as he wrote to one friend, he wanted to come up with the boldest experiment that he could think of.
Would you roll up your right sleeve, please? This electrode is connected to the shock generator in the next room. And this electrode paste is to provide a good contact to avoid any blister or burn. Do you have any questions now before we go into the next room?
About 2 years ago, I was at the Veterans Hospital in West Haven. And while there, they detected a heart condition. There's nothing serious, but as long as I'm having these shocks, how strong are they? How dangerous are they?
Well, no, although they may be painful, they're not dangerous. Anything else?
No, that's all.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experiment. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator.
Now, as teacher, you were seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is a word pair test. If he gets each answer correctly, fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you were instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts. And you increase the shock one step on each error.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105. Hard head. Just how far can you go in this thing?
As far as is necessary.
What do you mean as far as is necessary?
Milgram was very much aware that obedience is a necessary ingredient for society to function. But he focused on the darker side of obedience.
Incorrect. 150 volts. Sad face.
Wait a minute. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now.
It's absolutely essential that you continue. You got no other choice, teacher.
Oh, I have a lot of choices. My number one choice is that I wouldn't go on if I thought he was being harmed.
Now, this man makes disobedience seem a very rational and simple deed. Now, other subjects respond quite differently to the experimenter's authority.
Wrong. It's hair. 75 volts, Jim. You don't know.
Please continue.
Some psychologists were troubled by the ethics of it. Many, if not most subjects, found it a highly stressful, conflicted experience. People are stammering, stuttering, laughing hysterically, inappropriately.
150 volts.
Experimenter. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let
Go
me
on.
out. Let me out.
Clearly, when we say people went to the top of the shock board, it wasn't like they were going blithely, sadistically. People went stop and go, stop and go. They were in a state of conflict, which created a tremendous amount of stress. So that was the main critique.
This will be at 3:30.
As his voice began to show increasing frustration, so did I. And I was really in a state of real conflict and agitation. One of Stanley Milgram's basic contributions was that you don't ask people what they would do given this hypothetical situation. You put them in the situation.
Wrong. I'm up to 180 volts.
Please continue, teacher.
180 volts.
I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here.
Can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man there.
According to Milgram, one of the things that's a prerequisite for carrying out acts that are evil is to shed responsibility from your shoulders and hand it over to the person in charge.
I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
Next one's slow.
He didn't hold any gun to anybody's head. Just the fact that he conveyed a sense of authority. Roughly 60-65% of the people went all the way to the top of the shock board.
450 volts. That's it.
Now continue using the last switch on the board, please. The 450 switch for each wrong answer. Continue, please.
I'm not getting no answer. Don't the man's health mean anything?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we
But
must...
he might be dead in there.
Milgram made the point, I think very effectively, that the Nazis weren't all a bunch of psychopaths at Belsen and Dachau. A death camp from the middle class in New Haven.
Well, who was actually pushing the switch?
I was. But he kept insisting. I told him no, but he said he's got to keep going.
What kind of obedience would Milgram get today if he were to do the experiment today?
Probably about the same.
Probably about the same. Why?
I don't know. I think people are just inherently obedient.
It just really shows like how far human beings will go to appease what they perceive to be an authority figure.
Milgram has identified one of the constants, one of the universals of social behavior. The readiness to obey authority cuts across time. It's a constant. The other outstanding and distinctive thing about the obedience experiment is how much it has and keeps on permeating contemporary culture and thought. It's still with us in very, very important ways.
Okay, so I realized the sound kind of went out at a couple points, but hopefully in a way that didn't disrupt the point. I mean, I think everything that, it didn't seem to cut out in times when things that were particularly important were being communicated. So yeah, I mean, here we see an example of the power of authority, right? So these formal agents of social control who have the power to sanction us, even if that sanction is something as minimal as telling us we have to continue to do something we don't want to do, something that's potentially harmful and literally to the point where we might be killing another person, those agents of social control, retain that power, and we often, more often than not anyway, will obey. Now, in the video, the narrator points out that the experiment is considered unethical today, which it, by our standards, it really is quite unethical, and by the standards of the day, people were pissed about this experiment. So academic psychologists, because Milgram was a psychologist, haven't done this again, but other people have. So, for instance, there's a British TV show called The Heist that you can find the clip on YouTube. It's kind of a weird, it's kind of a, the host is kind of like slimy. It's yeah. But they, in one of the segments, they do this again, and people act essentially the same way. And that was very recently, men, women, and oh, one more thing. Milgram's experiment actually didn't stop with this. When Milgram conducted this original experiment, it played out the way we see in the video. But his initial reaction was, well, maybe there's something about the fact that we're on a college campus. He was at Stanford, and people were coming to Stanford, so maybe if he did it somewhere other than Stanford, then people wouldn't act the same way. So he did different versions of this. In some cases, the subjects could see the person that they were supposedly shocking, even though they weren't shocking the person. In some cases, people were asked to forcibly take the learner, again, who's just an actor, and take their arm and like force it, not like, but literally force it down onto the shock plate. So, and a lot of people complied. A lot of people complied. So, yeah, I mean, these agents of social control are enormously powerful. They are playing a huge role in our lives, both as external agents, but also for ourselves. You can easily turn into one of these agents that imposes these kinds of sanctions on others. So I just realized that that's a pretty sad way to end this. I feel like I should say something, uplifting or optimistic, but I got nothing. Remember that cute picture from a while ago? That was adorable, wasn't it? Yeah. Bye.